crime infests our cities, the federal government makes it harder for families to...
That noise, that's the countdown to the self-destruction of the Republican Party.
to make ends meet, and the president flounders. But decline is a choice. Success is attainable, and freedom is worth fighting for. Righting the ship requires restoring sanity to our society, normalcy to our communities, and integrity to our institutions. Truth must be our foundation, and common sense can no longer be an uncommon virtue. In Florida, we proved that it can be done. We chose facts over fear, education over indoctrination, law and order over rioting and disorder. We held the line when freedom hung in the balance. We showed that we can and must revitalize America. We need the courage to lead and the strength to win. I'm Ron DeSantis, and I'm running for president to lead our great American comeback.
Jesus Christ. The Republican Party might unironically, like, be destroyed in, like, 2 years. You don't think DeSantis is a good candidate? It doesn't matter what I think. What matters is that right now the Republican Party is torn in half over DeSantis versus Trump. You even saw, even when I jokingly asked that Lauren girl, who, like, I think I asked her on stream, didn't I? Who would you support, DeSantis or Trump? And she laughed. If you ask any Republican that question, that's a rough one. There's like an existential crisis for the Republican Party right now. Oh, shit, bro, their shit is f***ed. Oh, no. Hello?
Hey. Well, I just wanted to ask you a bit about, like, politics stuff. Where are you going in London, though? Wait, are you going to talk to Zizek?
Yeah, I'm going to be on a few panels about morality of love and sex or something. Oh, boy.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
So low energy. Okay. Are you not excited to talk to Zizek? I feel like Zizek's a really big deal.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Yeah. Sometimes I feel like there's a very interesting phenomenon where at some point I actually feel like I occupy like the perfect media space, because when you get a little bit higher, people are so careful and protected of their images and everything that the back and forths are actually incredibly boring. Like if I were to I think my best debate ever would be at like a Joe Rogan-ish level or lower, but that if I were to like get to the more professional-ish like Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson types, that those conversations would be exponentially more boring because people are like way more careful and protected, and the back and forth is just not as interesting, in my opinion. But I could be wrong on that, but yeah. So I wonder for Zizek, like, and then also like the topics are over like love and sex and everything or whatever, and I don't know if like societal stuff.
Really?
I don't think it's gonna be like hardcore back and forths on any of those, you know. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So it's like even in these like kind of more academic-y spheres, they're like talking about like basically like dating dynamics as well.
I don't think
dating and gender and relationships.
No, I'm sorry. I should have phrased this better. I think it's supposed to be. Fuck. They sent me a bunch of stuff that I'll probably review on my flight tomorrow, but it has to do with like it's basically discussing like relationships' place in society and like philosophically how it inserts or whatever. So like here's like a thing for a description of one of the debates or conversation. I don't know. Should we no longer see certain forms of sexual relationships involving commitment and monogamy as more moral than others? Might a relationship which abandoned the norm of traditional couples help to eradicate hierarchies and inequalities between the sexes and build a communal sense of family that we lack in contemporary culture? Or are morality and relationships necessarily linked and long-term commitment morally justified and essential for personal and social harmony? So these are like philosophical conversations on relationships and stuff, not like red pill versus whatever kind of thing, you know?
Well, it's interesting. It's the same. In many ways, like it's the same topic brand. It's just like branded and like in the I'm going to use the trigger word, in the like bubble of like kind of like the academic space version of talking about the similar topic. So it's like more nuanced, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess arguably, sure.
Okay, well that's exciting.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
Politics. I wanted to ask you a bit about politics.
Yeah, I do sometimes politics. Yeah.
I know you do sometimes. Okay, so I'm curious what your thoughts are on like some of the DeSantis stuff that's been happening in Florida specifically.
Wait, which stuff?
So specifically like all the bills that he's been passing recently about, hold on, I gotta skip this alert. It's just really loud. Specifically like some of the LGBTQ bills that he's been passing, and like It feels like some of the media I'm reading about it makes it sound like it's decently authoritative, that they're able to just like remove kids and like fire teachers and stuff. And I'm curious kind of your take on that, of like the level to which it's actually authoritative. And
I have no idea. Honestly, like I lose so much interest in this stuff because every single time a bill gets passed, it ends up being nothing about what the headlines say. So I believe it was within the past week, I think a bill got passed in Florida that everybody was saying, this is a bill that allows you to basically steal trans kids away from their family or whatever. But when you actually read the writing of the bill, I think what it does is it's like if kids have abandoned the home, it wasn't at all related to that. And it was like in a very, 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 very broad sense, maybe in like an edge case, it could happen to be this way. But that wasn't what the bill was about at all. And I feel like every time I look at one of these new like anti-trans genocide bills, when I read the text and when I even read the intentional law, it's not really like trying to kick all trans people out or abduct all trans kids or whatever. That it's just like all these headlines are blowing it up. But if there's like a particular piece of legislation we'll look at, we can look it up and read it and I'll give you my opinion on it. But
no, not specifically, I guess, because I'm starting to just try to like build up my own knowledge and understanding of politics, particularly if like because I'm curious what it's going to look like in kind of the scene when Trump and DeSantis are running against each other. Because I think that's like an interesting thing that's occurring within the Republicans that I think is quite not fully unique, because we've had populists like in the past and whatnot. I'm just curious about like the level of schisming that we're going to see, and I'm trying to like get a better finger on like who DeSantis is specifically, because I'm a lot more familiar obviously with Trump.
I mean, I feel like if for looking at the Trump DeSantis stuff, we're completely leaving the world of like effective policymaking and legislation. And it's literally going to be like who feels the other people have like the most epic tweets or whatever. Like when you talk to people that support Trump, now they're at least more honest about it. Like a few years ago, they're like, oh, well, I feel like Trump is a good leader. And I feel like he, was good at legislate. Like now they're honest. Like, no, I just think Trump owns the libs. And I like the way that Trump talks and everything. Like they're more honest about it now. DeSantis can point to having like an effective record, but like Trump fans are probably literally going to say shit like, well, he's 5'7" and a loser. And like, that's going to be their retort. I don't know. It's going to be really bloody. I don't know how that's going to look. Supposedly there are surprises coming in October from people to other people, but we'll see, I guess, what ends up happening. But yeah.
Do you think that that's kind of like the way, because I know a lot of people are asking for political content, and I just like notice like political content doesn't really like pop off. Nobody's like that interested in it. And it feels like political content right now isn't really like, nobody wants to talk about like the nitty gritty of policies basically ever. It feels like kind of what you outlined of like, whether it's like owning the libs or owning the conservatives, like on both sides. Do you think that the like tendency for people like Trump or DeSantis through this like kind of social media lens is also reflected within like the Democratic voting populace?
I don't, but I think the funny thing is when you go online, I think the impression you get is that the progressives are tearing the Democratic Party apart.
Which they're not.
Yeah, and then the Republicans are kind of like all like basically chilling and shitting at everybody. I guess if you don't pay attention to it much. But I think in the actual political world, I feel like from what I've seen, Democrats are fairly lockstep in most things right now. And the Republican establishment is crumbling in on itself right now. The Trump-DeSantis battle is brewing. Ira, you can chime in if you disagree with anything I say. But it feels like the Trump-DeSantis battle is brewing and looming on the horizon. In the alternative media sphere, you've got Daily Wire and Crowder are at each other's throats in the most vicious personal attacks ever. Yeah. Looking at Candace Owens and Crowder going at each other is insane. And then in the mainstream political world, you've got Tucker Carlson getting axed by Fox News after the historic Dominion lawsuit that is that was settled like a day before court because Fox realized, holy these texts go public, we're so I mean, the Republican establishment is like falling apart. But if you look online, it just kind of looks like the progressives are ruining everything. But I think in real life political world, the Republicans are in a lot of trouble. The Democrats are like pretty chill, I think.
Yeah. GOP's getting its ass kicked. The Tucker thing is huge. That was their big microphone right there. And that was like everything. It came out of nowhere too. Plus Fox got sued. And so they're weary of spreading nonsense moving forward. Mm-hmm. But what's up, dude? How's it going?
Just chilling.
Busy learning how to talk to women. Nice. Okay, I don't mean to sidetrack.
No, you're good. You're good. Okay, so then do you guys think that, because like when you listen to progressives and liberals, which there's not really any liberals in pop social media anymore, is there? Like I feel like Destiny, you might be like one of them. Is there? Or maybe my fingers aren't on it. Like sociocultural figures.
Like in terms of like alt media, I have no fucking idea. Are there?
Right.
I'm asking IRI, are there like any like center left like liberals in like alternative media? Like
an alternative,
who on the left is the equivalent to the Daily Wire?
I mean, we have like the Daily Show, and we have Hollywood, basically. Like,
yeah. So there's like we've got like culture war or like cultural stuff, but there's not like any like political news figures that are like the equivalent to the Daily Wire on the left, I think.
Nah, we don't have that. But that's alternative media. It doesn't reach as many people. Fox News is the king, though. I mean, Tucker had 3 times the audience a lot of these people had, so losing that was big. They're going to try to bring it on Twitter, though. They're going to try to bring their shows to Twitter and make it some big thing. But I don't know if you were listening, but this Twitter Spaces was a total disaster. They flopped, like, technically for 20, 30 minutes. Yeah, no, the Elon one right now with DeSantis. No. It was a total dud.
Like, nobody turned out to listen?
No, they had technical problems. They couldn't get it going.
Oh my gosh.
That's so interesting. Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, do you guys think with Tucker kind of moving into like, I guess, quote unquote, like alt media, that we'll start seeing like more like there isn't like the biggest Biden stands I know are going to be like Destiny and IRI in alt media. Like I can't really think of anyone.
No, everybody in my chat. Everybody in my chat keeps saying like the Young Turks and David Pakman, but these guys are like progressives. They're like on the ideological spectrum. I would say that like Steven Crowder is pretty far right, but the Daily Wire, Steven Crowder is further to the right than the Daily Wire, but the Daily Wire represents a solid center-right conservative mouthpiece, center-right conservative establishment, center-right conservative alternative media is the Daily Wire. There is nothing like the closest thing that would be center-left. My guess would be based on a little bit of like Pod Save America or something, but like an otherwise like alternative left media space, like everybody else is way to left. The Young Turks is not center left; they are far left. David Pakman is barely center left, but more far left. You can't say the Young Turks are center left. It's absolutely not true.
Do you think they're going to migrate center left? Like, do you think the center left is going to become
they already
popularized? As
people
are like,
Anna's
I see so many people frustrated with the progressive types. Anna, yeah, exactly.
Anna's getting bullied there, but yeah, we'll see. I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're moving center left. I just think this whole progressive movement's kind of fallen off. Like, when's the last time you heard something big about AOC or Bernie? They're nobodies now.
Yeah, because they didn't establish anything behind them. Yeah.
And aren't they not far enough left for a lot of like these like kind of alt media spaces?
Yeah, I don't know if like Jimmy Dore is a big fan of like AOC or Bernie Sanders anymore. I'm not sure.
That's a funny thing. You have people like Marianne Williamson now, Crystal Mommy, who's trying to primary Biden, and she's big on TikTok, but these are clowns. So Biden has just dominated the space. I mean, there's polls out there that people are hating on Biden. They want someone else. But I take that to just normies having no idea what's going on. Like Kayla said, it's hard to get into politics right now. It's all policy stuff. There's a huge fight right now that affects the global economy over the debt ceiling. That's just days away from a deadline, and nobody cares. Mm-hmm. But that's okay. I get it. What's that?
So I can't believe you just called me Kayla.
Damn.
I'm
sorry.
You do have a weird name. I think one of the issues, this is like a bullshit theory I had. I think Richard Spencer infected my mind with this. It's the idea that like sometimes you need very strong adversarial figures to fight against, to kind of rally around, to like orient yourselves. And this kind of like bullshit theory I have in my head is I kind of wonder if when Biden came into office, his goal was to be the great unifier. And I kind of wonder if he actually did that job really well, such that Biden is not really the lightning rod for Republican attacks that like Obama was or any far left figure is. It's really hard, or at least I haven't heard anybody like go crazy shit on Biden because he's not like that offensive. You know, he's a relatively inoffensive character. And because of that lack of focus on Biden, everybody is kind of like feeling aimless and they're like looking to turn on each other and attack each other. And now you've got like the whole Republican movement is for like the past literal year, it looks like my Twitch stream in the last 2 years of its life where it's all trans issues. Like that's the only thing the Republican Party mainstream seems to be talking about right now is trans people. It's actually insane. Like even their whole even the normal, you know how they do the Republican version of Kink at Pride, which is the caravans coming to the border. Even that only lasted like 2 days, I think, in their media. And now they're back to like passing more bills, trying to like regulate trans kids or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. You're not going to win an election on fairness in women's sports and tuck-friendly swimsuits at Target. It's just not going to win an election.
Yeah.
So I guess this is one thing I get confused by, and this might be like my lack of American politics, where it feels like I have a pretty good thumb, I think, on like the disparity between like Republican politicians and like their voters. Like I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of like who those individuals tend to be. Like there's like kind of the center right, atheistic Republicans, and then there's like the tradcons and stuff like that. Whereas my understanding of like the normies who vote who vote for like Biden and whatnot feels like I don't know who that archetype is, because I feel like every time I talk to normies who I know vote for Biden, they almost exclusively spout progressive ideas, right? They're talking like a ton about like landlords, they're talking about like LGBTQ plus topics and stuff like this, and they're talking, and maybe that's just because Biden is like, he's not really standoutish on any specific topic. He's like kind of like run of the mill. But I feel like I have a hard time mapping onto like who are the people that are voting for Biden and what's the difference between like them and like the progressive alt sphere. And why is there this gap, or is there?
I mean, I think Biden supporters are like pretty well represented. I'd have to dig into data, but I'm pretty sure they're pretty well represented from all like corners of the Democratic establishment, whereas progressives find their support probably overwhelmingly from younger, wealthier white people who are not necessarily like the mainstay of the Democratic Party, because a lot of these people just don't vote, especially because they're so young.
Yeah.
Yeah, like DSA is basically dead, and that was a huge thing up until recently. I think your average Biden voter is just people who support abortion, like Roe v. Wade. That's why a lot of Republicans moved over in the midterms, and Republicans got their asses kicked. And that's basically the issue that's going to win Democrats' votes for the next few election cycles, abortion. So Biden doesn't really have to do much except be just a steady hand on the wheel, run the government, keep the lights on, and he'll keep winning votes along with the Democrats. So I don't think there is like a typical Biden voter. It's just kind of people who like sensibility and want to see the government out of their lives as much as possible and leave them alone.
Yeah, sure. I guess it feels like when I'm on the ground talking to people who I know are voting for Biden or voting for like kind of like left-leaning parties, it feels like they're never talking about like what I would predict to be like run-of-the-mill like liberal talking points. It feels like they're always talking about pretty hyper-progressive talking points, which just feels like this like weird gap. And maybe this is just because of like the spaces that I'm exposed to, because I am exposed to like younger people and like academic types a lot of the time. But it's just like help. Like it gives me this hard time of understanding. Like I understand that probably the people voting more often tend to be older. They're probably working class and upper class, and they probably are like in the workforce doing like a lot of like tech jobs and kind of like some level of like education related jobs. It's probably your run-of-the-mill people voting for Biden. Is that a good understanding of the average demographics of who's voting, or am I just
for sure. Yeah, Bernie counted on young people to come out during 2020 and it failed. So most people who vote are older. I mean, young people are forced to be involved now because of climate change, concerns about school shootings, abortion. But for the most part, it's older people who are out there voting because they enjoy it. They understand it. And it's also kind of complicated to understand government. And like, how does any of this impact my life? What does it matter? So it's mostly for older folks. But I think you're running into people on the internet. I don't want to trivialize your interactions with these people, but the loudest, most angry voices tend to rise to the top. Outrage is rewarded on the internet. So you're not going to hear from your average like person who's just kind of voting 3 weeks in advance, you know?
And also keep in mind too, the demographics of the internet skew a lot younger, a lot wealthier, and a lot whiter than the average US citizen is.
True.
Do you guys think like what do you guys think about like right-wing politics evolving, like with the influence of like modern societal changes and cultural shifts? Like, do you guys see like DeSantis as like a market shift, or Trump, or do you think like they're still kind of run-of-the-mill for like what they hold for? Like, is there kind of like for example, it feels like more and more like young conservatives, for example, are decently pro-gay. Like they just don't really care about homosexuality at all. Whereas like
I don't know. I wouldn't call them pro-gay, but they're not like anti-gay.
Yeah. But if you went back 30 years, I would say even your like moderate right person would be very anti-gay, like, for sure. Do you see like more of that happening, like just the like general trend left? And who represents that more, like DeSantis or Trump?
Well, I mean, you want to go? I'm curious what Destiny says.
I mean, I think that Alito, I think, said it well. There are some social issues in the United States that are kind of settled, and I think gay stuff is one of those issues. Like, nobody is going to fight over that anymore. There are other issues that aren't settled, like abortion, and which we're going to fight over a lot. However, I don't think the battle between DeSantis and Trump is one of policy, because Trump he was never supported for his policies, and he isn't in any size, shape, sense of the word like a traditional Republican figure. Like, he never even was really a Republican, you know. Like, he's a real estate guy from New York. He passed anti-gun control legislation. It's one of the reasons why people in Georgia hated him so much. So it's very hard to look at like Trump versus DeSantis and think of it in terms of like, okay, well, ideologically, who has like the soul of the Republican Party, when the soul of the Republican Party right now is not being fought on policy grounds, but rather on literally like who has the best tweets. Like I really do feel like, as stupid as that is, that's how a lot of conservatives view their support for Trump.
Yeah, the Republican Party is all about rage right now. It's all about grievances. It's not about policy. It's not about moving the country in any direction. They are mad as hell. They think they're looking for someone to blame. White people are losing their majority, and it is a bumpy ride right now for the GOP. And I wouldn't say there's much difference between DeSantis and Trump. Ron DeSantis is just Trump without the baggage. That's pretty much it. He's also much younger. He's only 44 years old. But he is no different than Trump. In fact, he's further to the right now with some of his policy, like abortion. He's passed a 6-week ban in Florida. This Don't Say Gay bill. Trump is on the fence on that stuff. He's like, well, I'll pass whatever is brought to me. He's running in the general while DeSantis is running in the primary. But I think the Republican Party is screwed for many, many years, just simply off the issue of abortion. They're just out of step with where the American people are at. And
I think it depends. I think it depends on how far left the people on the left are pushing. When you come to things like third trimester abortion and stuff, that like I think California might have that, and some Democrats kind of want to defend that. I do think abortion is still a contentious issue in the United States, but in terms of like DeSantis versus Trump, I do agree though that I think the majority of Americans are in favor of like some abortion rights though, which obviously Republicans kind of go back and forth on depending on who you talk to. But I think the biggest indicator right now that the Republican Party is in a lot of trouble is if you're a reasonable Republican who cares at all about the future of the country or cares at all about policy, the choice between DeSantis and Trump is crystal clear. And DeSantis wins by a mile. It's not even close. He's not as fucking crazy. He's not a loose cannon on Twitter. He's a much more effective leader. He's very good at getting legislation passed. He carried the out of Florida, and he exceeded all expectations there. He's 40 years younger. Like DeSantis is the clear choice. But the fact that so many Republicans still support Trump, I think goes to show you that if I was a betting man, if I wanted to tell you like what your path to success was right now, it would be to fire everybody that does polling, everybody that does political analysis, and you should just be going to like fucking SNL and hiring writers to literally craft the wittiest tweets and the funniest ads. Because I really think that's how the next Republican candidate is going to be decided, unironically.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Ron DeSantis Twitter space.
Hello? Is my microphone working correctly?
George, can you just wait while we...
Hello? Can you hear me?
We can all hear you, George. Can you just hold on for a second?
Hilfa, I don't think they can hear me.
I can hear you fine, George. Just speak to the
I don't think George knows how to use Twitter.
Hello? Can you hear me now?
Can I please make my big announcement now? Everyone just...
Hello?
Just shut up, George.
Can somebody just mute George?
Dick, could you try not to cough on the...
Okay, so how are we going to take out Trump, you guys?
Guys from the FBI, this is not a private call. This is a public Twitter space. Everyone can listen in.
God damn it.
Anyway, guys, we invited everyone to this Twitter space so Governor Ron DeSantis could...
Everyone just shut the hell up so I can make my announcement, okay?
You go, girl.
Wait, the devil is gay?
So what? Everyone in this call is gay. I happen to know every single one of you has a secret gay lover hidden in your closet.
Mein Führer, ich kann nicht zulassen, dass die Soldaten, die für Sie verpflichtet sind,
Guys, can we please just calm down?
So anyway, guys, I just wanted to announce that I'm...
Okay, I can hear the governor very well.
Shut up, would you please shut up already? I'm running for fucking president, okay?
Yeah, we kind of already knew about it.
We already know, Governor.
Congratulations, Governor.
Well, that concludes our Twitter space for today. Thank you to all of our...
Hold your horses, Elon. The real president is going to say a few words. The devil, I'm going to kick your ass very soon. Hitler, you're already dead. Dick Cheney sounds like you'll be joining Hitler very soon. Klaus Schwab and George Soros, I'm putting both your asses in jail. And Ron DeSanctimonious can kiss my big, beautiful 2024 presidential ass. Trump 2024, baby. Let's go.
Do you think that this is in part, so it feels like in the past, and maybe this is my Canadian bias as well, a lot of, I'll say conservative in this case, a lot of conservative voters, the like main thing that they would care about typically was like economic stuff. But my frustration is when you listen to, I would say most people, but particularly kind of like older conservative leaning people, their understanding of economics is like 1960s economics, like still appeal to like Dave Ramsey and like stuff like that. Do you like why are Republicans not talking like in a case where like I feel like inflation's really high, there's a lot of like stress around money, there's like concerns about like recessions after like COVID and stuff. It feels like the most important thing to talk about, particularly for a conservative voter basis, would be economics, and yet I don't see anyone ever talking about it. Whereas I do remember growing up and hearing about this. But maybe this is a Canadian bias. Maybe Canadians talk about economics more than Americans do. I don't know.
Well, we do. It's just not as accessible. Like, things are going pretty well in the economy as well. And I know people are going to soy out about that, but we have like record unemployment right now, 3.4% in the United States. We have the lowest black unemployment ever, 4.7%. So things are going pretty well. So it's kind of hard to give Biden a hard time on the economy. He's also been great on lowering the deficit. And right now he's in talks with the Republicans to lower spending even further. So while that's been a staple for the Republicans to focus on the economy, like I said, they've turned their party into a party of grievance now, where it's all about us versus them. And that's because of Donald Trump. That's how he runs his whole life with enemies. And so he took over the party and shaped it the way he wants it. So they're kind of cucked right now, as long as he's still a major player in their party, and he's not going anywhere for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just don't think Republicans just don't really care about economic policy at all. Like, a lot of shit changed from Bush to, I think it was from Bush and then through the Tea Party and then to Trump. In like 10 years, Republicans went from we support big business because it's literally like the lifeblood of the United States as our large corporations, into now hating big business as much as like progressives do. So like the Republican Party has like 180'd its view on large corporations, and now shit like Facebook and everything, these are the enemy and they need to be like socialized and shit. So honestly, Republicans never had a strong economic foundation to begin with. But I unironically believe, have you ever heard of something called third positionism?
No.
No.
It's kind of like Nazism, but not really. No, I think a third positionist is somebody, isn't it somebody who is, they're socially very conservative, but they're economically very liberal? Like, I legitimately believe that a lot of Republicans that support Trump these days would be in favor of a lot more economic redistribution and these types of policies like higher minimum wage and everything, as long as you're like restricting things like immigration and you're getting rid of things like abortion and you're cracking down a little bit more socially on things going on in the country. But yeah, the days of past of like the traditional conservative economic platform, I don't think conservatives really give a fuck about it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look at the fight with Disney right now between DeSantis, in Florida. That's incredible to see the Republicans doing that, lashing out at Disney and punishing them for speaking their mind. A corporation and the largest employer in the state of Florida. Disney is a gangster, man. You don't mess with them. They will kill you. So it's pretty wild to see the Republicans going down this road. They've completely changed.
Yeah, DeSantis seems like a really, really interesting character to kind of like start like popping off. And maybe that's only because I have this bias of like I'm finally like paying closer attention to this stuff. But just like seeing the way that he's like navigating policy within Florida feels very like dynamic compared to like, it feels like any other person that I've seen in the past. Do you guys think there's any concern? Because I've heard like obviously this is going to come from like breadtube area, but like any concerns about like DeSantis being like more authoritarian in general and like trending towards like being like quite authoritarian in like if he won the presidency?
Yeah, 100%. And he's actually capable. Unlike Trump, he would surround himself with smart people. And by the way, he's out fundraised Trump by like double right now. People don't even know this, but the guy's got like $110 million in the bank compared to Trump, who has raised like $20 million since he launched. I mean, it's been a pathetic fundraising for Trump. So DeSantis is definitely scary, but I think he'll get sunk in the general by his extreme positions on things like abortion. I tell you, I know I keep saying it, but look at the midterms. The Republicans got their asses kicked in the midterms. Why? Abortion and too extreme a candidates. And that's the exact formula that they're presenting, the exact recipe they're putting up for the general.
I kind of disagree. I guess we'll see what happens, or if you have other reasons to feel why, maybe I'm just not aware of it. But I legitimately do think that Trump is a full-on fascist, 1,000,000%. I think that if Trump could have like waved a wand and did away with like voting, or I mean, he tried to literally. I don't think we will ever see anybody, because Trump doesn't have the mind for politics at all, or the understanding for politics at all. I don't think you will ever see anybody as flagrant as Donald Trump when it comes to disrespect of rule of law and disrespect of democratic process. I think DeSantis would be more quote unquote authoritarian, and that he would try to pass like social policy policies and stuff that are maybe unfair to minorities and stuff. But in terms of like blatantly trying to steal elections and shit, I don't think you would ever see that type of behavior from an actual leader like DeSantis. But that's my guess. So I could be wrong, but.
Right. And isn't that part of like what was Trump's appeal, is that he was so like non-politician-y? Like he wasn't really like, kind of born and raised in the politician world, and he just kind of like did whatever the fuck he wanted. Probably a large portion behind Trump was also Roger Stone and like kind of the like weird campaign that they ran.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, him being like an outsider and not a politician or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Destiny that Trump is way crazier on the elections because he couldn't win. He had to cheat, right? But when I look at
crazy and historically fucking insane ways. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and we don't even know the half of it. Wait till the indictments come down from Jack Smith. I mean, I think people are going to be shocked at what this guy was up to, and even in the Georgia case, when those indictments come down, it's going to be pretty shocking for people. But again, with abortion, I look at it and one of the exceptions is for rape in the Florida abortion bill, but you have to show receipts. So women have to go prove that they were raped and with paperwork. I mean, that is authoritarian as hell to me.
Well, what do we mean by authoritarian? That's technically not authoritarian at all, right? Well, it's shitty, but
to me, it's controlling half the population and telling them what they can do with their body, and you know, and putting them up their word versus someone else's word, and having to show receipts. I mean,
I guess when I think of authoritarian, I'm thinking like somebody that's willing to break political process, break democratic process, break rule of law to try to pass things, basically, essentially on their own in contradiction to how our democratic process is supposed to work. So, for instance, like Trump claiming the election is stolen, Trump claiming that mail-in ballots are fraudulent, Trump trying to call Georgia looking for ballots, Trump encouraging Pence to overturn the election. Like these are the things, these are like grossly anti-democratic things that I don't think DeSantis or any other Republican would ever try, that I'm thinking when I think of like authoritarian. But in terms of like shitty social policy, yeah, I agree. He would probably try to pass more and be more effective at doing so than Trump would be.
Yeah, I guess I just see it as what is the end result? What happens in the end, you know? Like you can make people feel good by voting, but if you control big policy that impacts their lives and forces them to do things, to me, that's authoritarianism. But I see what you're saying. I agree. I mean, the voting stuff is wild too. Trust me.
Like I obviously don't like restricting abortion rights and everything, because that's not what I agree should be done as policy. But if it's passed through democratic measures, if people support the leadership doing it or whatever, even though I don't like it, that's part of being an American, is sometimes legislation and stuff can pass that I don't like. But I don't like the idea of people trying to unilaterally decide election outcomes because they're not happy with how things turned out. That's, in my opinion, that is an authoritarian, totalitarian, a fascist action, basically. And I think Trump was unique in his propensity to do that.
So I guess I'm not fully satisfied by the answer that like the main thing that's going to like lead to conservatives like voting one way or another, and I know you're being somewhat flippant, is just like who gets like the sickest dunk on libs. It feels like I feel like one of the most important things is to like criticize your in group and understand your out group, like in like all things, but particularly like politically, not because I see like conservatives as like the enemy necessarily, but because I think it's important to understand like why people congregate around certain leaders. And I would agree with you that like Trump did things that were like, violated the democratic process, which is really important to me because I think it's like fundamental to understand why so many people found that appealing specifically. And I don't know if I'm like satisfied with like the Twitter answer. And
why so many people found what appealing?
Trump specifically. Like what was the appeal of Trump? Why are so many people still attached within the Conservative Party? Like what has shifted within the populace that somebody who's essentially has risk of, in your words, like violating their democratic process, why are so many conservatives like following in suit behind that? Like, I don't know if it's just like Twitter wars enough. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, I guess.
The shitty reality is Americans as a whole are largely uneducated on most of our political processes, and Americans as a whole don't really give much a fuck about democratic norms. And I think that for both sides, I think if you had the ability to flip certain norms to favor you, I think you would do it. That's like largely speaking how I would feel. It just so happens that at this particular point in time, Republicans, especially Trump, are trying to do it in ways that have never been done before. But the idea,
like, you don't think it's a uniquely conservative issue. You think like Democrats would be willing to do it if they could get away with it?
Yeah, I think that there are I just don't see the opportunities for them, and then everybody's gonna be pushing for it right now in the same way that Donald Trump did. But I think that a lot of Americans probably felt like they weren't being heard as part of the political process because politics and policy is complicated right now in the United States. So it feels like our elected leaders are doing nothing. And when you get a guy who's coming from the outside, even though he's a billionaire, saying that he's gonna hear your cries, all the standard populist rhetoric, he's gonna come in, he's gonna be the outsider, he's gonna clean up the swamp and blah blah blah. People are too stupid to see before it happens that it's just business as usual, nothing different has changed, like nothing really happened.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's anything true that there's, sorry, IRI, do you think there's anything true? Like in my mind, if an idea becomes like so popular that like millions of people get behind it, maybe this is silly on my part, but I tend to almost always look for there's got to be a kernel of truth somewhere in there. I don't know what it is. And it's not always the self-evident thing, but I think it's really important to contend with these ideas to know what is the one thing that they're tagging onto. So is there massive amounts of corporate institutional rot and corruption that people are frustrated by and maybe are not mapping onto correctly, but is there an element of truth there? I don't know. And I guess maybe
no, the element of truth is just that people do feel frustrated and they do feel unheard. That's the true thing. But I think the prediction was before Trump got elected that I'd read a couple times, and it seems to have come true, is the route for populists are always, we're going to come into office, we're going to do things right, we're going to clean shit up. Then the populist gets elected, they get into office, and people realize, oh shit, it's way more complicated than we thought. We're not cleaning up anything. Nothing is going to change. And we're actually a less effective leader than normal. And then things go back to normal because they're like, I guess there's a reason why things are the way they are. And that is almost exactly what happened with Trump. He got in office. He literally got nothing done. He got one piece of major legislation passed, which was a tax bill. And that was it. Nothing else got changed. And arguably his administration was more corrupt and more swamp ridden than any of the past administrations that they had criticized. So.
Yeah, I think Trump gave people a boogeyman. He gave them someone to point to, people coming over the border. And that's what the Republican Party is still going on and on about. It's always about some boogeyman. It's about your kids being transed in school, or it's about these migrants coming over and flooding America with fentanyl, whatever it is, so you don't have to look in the mirror and deal with your problems. But it's all just a distraction. As far as a core idea, I don't know. It's tough to say. There's a lot of problems. The real issue is that Congress has become completely a logjam. They can't get anything done. So we have 30-year-old laws that govern the internet, for example. We have 30-year-old laws that govern the border, our immigration, when it was single males coming from Mexico, and now it's migrants coming as refugees. So our Congress is unable to deal with problems. They very well could if they could get along. And that leads to a strong man like Trump being able to tell everybody, I'll fix it. I'll fix it all. And here's what's happening. And then when he doesn't do that, he blames the deep state. If only I had 2 more weeks, I could finish the wall. Give me 1 day, I'll solve the crisis in Ukraine. Nonsense like that. People get susceptible. Finally, I'll say, I think the internet has really contributed a lot. People watch videos all day long, see white people getting punched in the face by black people, or they hear that, Target is selling whatever I called it, the tuck appropriate swimsuits or something, and that's ruining our kids and turning them gay, and so they start freaking out about all these things. And it's sad because if we had proper regulation of the internet, then these social media companies wouldn't get away with this stuff and making a few extra bucks off causing outrage in society. And it feels to conservatives like society is moving too quickly, right? They don't understand trans, they don't understand some of this stuff, and so they're reacting to that, and they're trying to hold on to the past.
But in many ways, that's the role that the conservatives have always served in almost, that's the purpose of them within democratic societies, is in many ways it feels like the purpose of conservatives regularly is to go whoa on change. I'm not saying that they always do it well or that I agree with it, whereas it tends to be the liberal side to essentially say, what can we push for? What can we change that would improve the lives of everyone? And it's this dynamic that I think is valuable. It's the inborn power correction within the structure itself, particularly my understanding, which is limited, particularly within American politics with the 2-party system. The tension between the two is fundamental for the corrections of balance of power. And I guess when I'm thinking about,
I just disagree. Yeah, I feel like conservatism is based in ignorance. I hate to say it, but a lot of it is just based in, I don't like that, it makes me feel bad, or I don't like the direction the government's going, I don't like helping other people. They don't understand what progressive policies are. They don't understand what like Medicare for All would do for them personally. I try to tell people, you have to appeal to people's selfishness when it comes to policy. You can't be like, let's get all the homeless off the street, right? That'll make us all feel good. No, you're talking about these people aren't working. They're not doing jack shit. Let's get their tax dollars, let's get them in the community coaching softball, whatever. So I have no patience for conservatives. I hate to say that.
I mean, the progressive, well, real quick, the progressive mouthpiece has been pretty loud online, though, and I would say that they're probably just as ignorant right now as a lot of the big conservative pushing voices. So I wouldn't say that I think that if you go to like the Daily Wire tier of, and if we ignore like the more extreme shit that Matt Walsh does, I think that there is an important tension that can be represented there, where there's probably needs to be some push and pull between the left and the right, and I think that there is a center-right presence in the United States that can represent that. It's just that right now the Republican Party is just kind of like following Trump off a cliff, or half of them are. So
yeah, I guess
I was going to say that I think a lot of what you're saying though about the conservative people overall seems to be changing a bit, though. As you mentioned earlier, Stephen, you talked about like third positionism and such. And like overall, historically, conservatives in America have been all about reaction to change, right? Oh, something's changing. Let's bring things back to norm, right? But things changed a lot with Trump, with wanting to move in a more authoritarian direction for some, and people wanting to get more extreme with the responses to change, which means that they're willing to go to certain lengths that are unusual for conservatives and Republicans, wanting to actually implement massive sweeping change themselves in response to progressive change. So the parameters of like what Republicans and conservatives in America will do these days and will allow to happen to America have been changed quite a bit and augmented, and they're open to broader ideas, even bringing in very unconventional characters that don't normally carry conservative values with them, like Trump, for instance. So, and I think a lot of this is sort of in response to just sort of a general sense of being out of control, sort of a bleakness that's affected a lot of Americans in feeling like they have no ability to affect the state of their country and their own future. And a lot of it is reaching for like new solutions.
Yeah, like I think a lot of time the boogeyman that people point to about like corruption within the system, like I think is corruption, right? And probably the corruption that exists now is, like all things, probably way more complicated than it was in the past, which means it's going to be way harder. It doesn't mean that we have a system that wants to reinforce corruption. It means that we have a system that's so complicated that it's even harder to tease these things out. But I think like a lot of people don't feel represented because of like things like bureaucratic bloat, right? And just like the overly slow processes by which like things change, kind of like what IRI pointed out. I guess going back to like what IRI said, I feel dissatisfied of just like being like conservatives are just like ignorant, and it's like probably the lack of education is part of it, right? And this is like something I always fall back on, is like a lot of times it feels like a lot of times conservatives will be right about their like predictive fears of things. However, the reason that they are is because like they can just fall back on tradition, right? Like they don't really need to understand anything. They can be like, well, it worked before, so it's probably going to work again. And like the reality is that like that's true a lot of the time, even mathematically. The issue is that when we're talking about like social change, which I think is good because I think there are things that do need to change, I think we get into this complicated dance that like it feels like on the left, for example, we presume of like this policy will fix things. And sometimes that's true because sometimes there's the evidence behind it. And it's frustrating when conservatives are like, no. And you're like, no, there's very good evidence for this policy being really effective and helpful, right? But then there's other policies that will get rolled out reactively that feel like social engineering is more complicated than I think we ever give it credit for sometimes. And I feel like when I look at conservatives, they kind of like embody this Chesterton's fence of like not wanting to change things until we like understand the affairs that like have affected it, and probably too much so. Like, yeah.
Kind of defaulting to paralysis before change.
I think conservatives would tell you that they're standing up for liberty and individual freedom, and like they want people to just be good on their own and control their own lives. But it's ignoring that a lot of people need help, and a lot of people are not in the same position as them. But I just look at conservative policies and I'm like, what are these guys doing? Look at any issue, gun control, for example. What are they fighting for? Open carry to arm school guards and teachers? Like, these people are not serious about solving society's problems.
When you look, it's a different ideological approach. Like, I think that like guns are the perfect distillation of conservative ideologies. Conservatives view responsibility for communities as belonging to the communities themselves, and liberals or progressives view responsibility of communities as from the federal government. So to a progressive, you might see like, well, there's an effective top-down policy that we can do to alleviate society of some ill. To a conservative, they're thinking like, why the would I ship all of my money to the federal government just for it to go to other parts of the country or other parts of my state when we should be taking care of our own communities? And this is even reflected, I think, in like charitable contributions. I think conservatives donate more to churches and stuff than progressives or liberals do. So, I mean, like the difference is always going to be that conservatives feel like change and progress should come at the local level, whereas progressives have like a more top-down view of it. But I mean, there's no shortage also of conservatives to look at liberal policies to go like, oh, well, like look at Chicago or look at LA, look at the $10,000 light installations that were put all over like San Jose or whatever. Like all the wasted spending and everything. Like they can always point to stuff like that and go, well, your policies don't work either, you know?
Well,
like if you look at places like Seattle and LA, like there's no conservative city that has homelessness at that level, right? If you look at Austin, if you look at like New York City in the subway, if you look at all these things, right?
Yeah, one of the things that I do appreciate about like conservative ethic has a lot to do with you take care of your own community, right? And you kind of keep things cleaned up. But the problem is they tend to have oftentimes a more aggressive or even penal approach to doing that. That a lot of people who would end up economically disenfranchised may end up just locked up in jail or something, right? So there's sort of a balance that would be great to achieve between that, where you can have both understanding of the economic stressors that people face and try to come up with solutions that limit those or reduce them, or maybe even eventually eliminate them, as well as also encouraging community and personal responsibility and such. But things are so damn polarized that even talking about personal responsibility or talking about charity makes people point to you as being like the problem on one side, and talking about recognizing systemic issues and economic stressors makes people point to you as the enemy from the other side.
Yeah, I think it's so much more important for liberals specifically, and I probably have this criticism mostly because I lean left, right? But I think I get really frustrated when I look at like my own side, when it feels like we have like brain rot of understanding the other side, right? Where it's just like, and not that I'm like saying IRA are just like brain rotted by any means, because you bar none have like much more sophisticated like interpretations. Lots of people just try to say conservatives are ontologically evil and like them, right? Which is like the worst possible response. But I think
their response.
Yeah, but it's dissatisfying to me, particularly because when you like go into like conservative neighborhoods, kind of like as Ani said, you'll see like they're pretty good at taking care of people that are their own, right? They're like quite family oriented and whatnot. They're just fucking shit at caring about other people, right? Whereas oftentimes, this is like I don't know if you guys have commonly experienced this, when you go into like a more like liberal dominated space, for example, I find people less like friendly. There's a little bit like they're not as good hosts. They're not as like warm or welcoming, but they broadly care about others a lot. And which is probably my orientation as well, which is probably why I'm liberal. But I feel like looking at conservatives and just being like, they're just dumb and uninformed, feels like the wrong answer, because like at the end of the day, there's something psychologically appealing to these people, and I don't know if it's like just dumbness. And if it is the case that they're literally just stupid, then to me it feels like to some degree building a level of bridge so that like policy can change is then on the liberals. If you're saying that they're literally less educated and dumber, then like the more educated people's responsibility would be to like find intelligent ways to like bridge that gap. But like maybe I'm being too idealistic.
Listen, ignorance is a tough word. I use it just to piss people off. But I'm ignorant about food, for example. I go eat McDonald's on the weekend. I'm a total chud when it comes to fine dining. And people could look at me and be like, what's your problem, man? Why would you just keep eating McDonald's like an idiot? But that's what I know, and that's what I stick to. And I feel a lot of conservatives fall into that pool where they don't want to learn. They don't want to hear. They want affirmation of what they already are comfortable with. And anything different makes them feel weird. weird. I love my fellow Americans. I have no problem with conservatives. These are people who I feel have been taken advantage of by right-wing media. I mean, Fox News had to pay $800 million recently for lying to their audience. So I think that a lot of these people are victims, and they're not going to like to hear that when I say it, but it's the truth. And their patriotism is being weaponized for things like January 6th. And I feel a lot of their policy positions are not thought through. They're just being told to get mad at Target for having bathing suits for trans people, and that's what they base their policy on. And how can we have a serious conversation with people who are just ginned up or fired, drunk on grievance?
Yeah, but I mean, like a lot of the conversation topics from the other end in terms of media are just as bad, though, right? Yeah. Like the Uber DEI lady literally just got shelved for trying to talk about how maybe Karen is like an offensive thing. And one of the quotes that I literally read in the article that came from one of the Hispanic Substacks was, I don't think they realize what it's like to have to sit there and feel like you're being lectured. And it's like, bro, people of color have been doing that to white people for like 25 fucking years. Like, let me sit you down and tell you about how challenging my experiences are, because sometimes when I cross the street, a cop might look at me weird, right? Like, and the idea that we're seeing these types of message propagated over and over and over and over again on social media, I'm not saying it represents the mainstay of like the Democratic establishment, but when you see those messages a billion times, of course that shit is going to wear on people's minds, right?
Well, but we don't stand for a lot of that stuff. Like you brought up the point about California, where we support elective abortion up until the end of your pregnancy. There's a lot of misinformation out there like that. Like no Democrats want to see people have elective abortions up until the date of birth, but there's a lot of conservatives out there that think that's our position. So that's misinformation. And so we're having a discussion when one side is completely misinformed. But as far as like DEI and all the concern on the left, I think that stuff pales in comparison. Tucker Carlson was a monster compared to what? Someone on MSNBC or Don Lemon? I mean, it's a joke.
I like sort of yes and no, right? But the issue is like media is a really interesting one, because like Fox News getting like in trouble from Dominion, I think is really great for cleaning up media a little bit. Like one of the best things I think that's happened in a long time. And I wouldn't be surprised to find out like one is maybe like worse than the other. The issue is like, I think City Bike Karen is a really good example of the failure of like kind of like mainstream left social media, like actual media sources, and their way of like approaching, or even like Kyle Rittenhouse is another good example. And so like, I see, for example, way less of like the lying at like broad societal scales, like Fox News is doing about like voter, like literally the stolen election shit. But there's like active lying that will happen on like specifically like agendized kind of cultural topics, like Kyle Rittenhouse, right? When at first Kyle Rittenhouse came out, they were claiming that he was like some crazy white supremacist who was like part of gang. I'm pretty sure I remember I read the breaking news the first day and I was like, oh man, crazy. This like white supremacist potentially like, like Proud Boys affiliated individual is like gunning down black people on the street. And then it turns out literally none of that was happening. City Bike Karen is another really good example of just like abject failures. And so they're by no means as extreme as Fox News, but the disillusion, for example, from like media is certainly not a single party problem.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't disagree, okay? AOC was calling this guy, I think his name's Daniel Penny or whatever, that choked the kid on the subway, calling him a murderer and all that. I disagree with that. I think that's extreme for sure. So it does happen, but you don't see CNN getting sued for misinformation.
Also,
well, hold on. Wait a second. Hold on. Didn't they
you
get
talk
massively,
about the kid?
Yeah, the Covington kids. Didn't they get massively sued for that, to be fair?
We don't know. He could have got $25,000 for all we know. It's a settlement. Nobody can talk about the amount. So who knows what that kid got? But okay. I guarantee it wasn't the $250 million he wanted.
Probably $250 million, but okay, sorry, go ahead. Also, I've got to leave in like 10 minutes, so I'll go for it.
Okay. Oh, I was going to say, regarding the ignorance thing, one thing I've found, I don't know if you guys have seen it, something similar, but I feel like even though conservatives are going to be more ignorant of systemic issues and such, I feel like liberals oftentimes tend to be a bit more unrealistic about how people view things and how people will respond to like certain types of messaging. I feel like conservatives tend to be a little bit more down to earth and realistic about how people operate and function and respond to things, where liberals tend to be more ignorant of that and have a bit more of a pipe dream about how human behavior is. So I kind of see the ignorance being more about like liberals are more willing to explore and understand systemic issues, but not as willing to understand the human animal itself.
Here's what I think actually happens for conservatives. I think they happen to just like understand the human self more because they can just like keep falling back on tradition, right? Like if you actually understand, like unironically, like some of the most cringe interpretations of human behavior come from conservatives, right? Because like they don't understand why it's happening. They can just understand like people tend to react this way, but that's because they get to fall back on tradition. Whereas like it feels like for like the liberal predisposition is tend to like to question tradition heavily, and like more so like try to analyze and figure it out for themselves, which just leads you to being wrong more often. But the problem is like if you ask like conservatives like why something happens, their ideology understanding of like even like basic psychological factors is usually pretty terrible.
I think it just super depends on the issue, because I think progressives have a blind spot on a lot of cultural issues right now, right? Like everything is white supremacy, everything is racism, everything. Like you said, like that city bike thing was a perfect example of it. If you would have race swapped that, or if it would have been 5 white people instead of 4 African Americans
and a black woman who's pregnant,
it would have been like the reaction would have been 1,000,000,000% different. Or if the guy if it would have been a white homeless dude on the bus and a black guy that choked him out, we wouldn't even be talking about it today. Like the racial obsession on the left has become pathological at this point. It's actually fucking unhinged.
And a lot of progressives will drastically overestimate the willingness of most people to accept certain like more radical forms of change. And we'll think, oh yeah, America's totally ready for this. We can go forward with this, push it forward aggressively. Everybody's going to be on board with it. And then they're shocked to realize that that is not the reaction, right? So that's another blind spot right there.
Okay, I love you guys. It's been fun. You can keep talking. I'm going to take off.